So welcome to the After Hours Live Special, live Q&A. We have tons and tons of questions for you today. Our part of our regular routine is, what are you drinking? Remember, it's after hours for us here on the East Coast, so alcoholic beverages are allowed, but not for me because, I'm drinking unsweet tea. You know me, I'm drinking something weird anyway. So unsweet tea with a dash of lemon essential oil. And I apologize in advance. I've got a little bit of a sore throat because I was teaching for the last 3 solid days. So, I literally just finished my class at 10 till 6. So I was in panic mode, shutting down all my work stuff and bringing up my personal computer. So again, thank you for coming. The show is going to be recorded. If you miss it, you'll be able to find it on YouTube. And all of our past live streams are on YouTube. Make sure you also visit by our webpage, letstalkcabling.com, so that way you get access to all the audio, all the video, and all that fun stuff. And if you do find value in this content, please consider supporting us. You can do that through the Patreon page. You go to Google and type in Patreon, Let's Talk Cabling, you will find us. There's a couple of different levels, and it just helps offset the cost of the streaming software, the hosting software, and all that fun stuff. I'm not looking to make money off this. I'm just trying to kind of pay some of the bills that I do this with. Again, this content is free. It will always be free to you, the end user. All right, so we'll never charge for it. But if you do find value in that content, absolutely, positively, hook us up on Patreon. So, like I said, we had one question left over from last week that we just kind of really ran out of time, and we were talking about. Somebody asked about labeling. And I went through the 4 different classifications of labels and stuff. And then somebody popped up a question about, well, how do you label in a data center? And of course, I was already like 5 minutes over on the show time. So I told him I would answer in today's Q&A section. Now, here's the thing. There's really two parts to this answer. And as I've always said in our industry, even if you can be an RCDD, but you're never an expert. So it's all about who you know. So we're going to answer the 2 parts of this question. The first part, I'm going to answer about the grid system and actually how to label the stuff. But on the flip side of that, there are some other things that you need to be aware of inside of data centers. Like, it gets really cold. There's low humidity. What about when labels fall off? And that's when I brought one of my fellow, if you go to our webpage, you notice that I have an expert counsel. Of course, I haven't put the people on there yet because I'm still working on it. And Todd Morse is one of my expert counsel members, and he addresses anything for as far as labeling and stuff like that. So he's going to answer that portion of the question because he is a true subject matter expert when it comes to that, especially if you have questions about specific things in labeling. So let's talk about data centers. So data centers, what you're really going to want to use is what's called the grid system. Now, I actually made a little graphic. So let's get that to show up there. And there we go. So here's my fake data center. Right now, when you see a data center, at the tops of the walls, on one wall, you're going to find the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to whatever. And then on an adjacent wall, you're going to find letters labeled AA, AB, AC, AD. So now if you want to determine or label something, you look at the rack's location. So these little squares are the floor tiles inside that data center. And it's always best when you do the grid system to pick a consistent spot to use for your numbering sequence. What I mean by that is, a lot of people like to use the front left corner. So how do we know which is the front left corner looking at this rack? You get extra credit if you know the answer to it. Cold aisles and hot aisles, right? The hot aisles is the back sides of these cabinets facing the back side of the second cabinet. So the front is where it says the cold aisle. So looking at my first rack, you'll notice it says AC02. So if I look in the very front corner, that's in the AC row, and then you go up to the top, you see it's in row 2. So the rack next to it would be AD02, and then so on and so forth. So that's the grid system. And that's how you can label stuff in a data center. And you'll see it a lot of times because they usually, I wonder if they use a Brother Systems labeling machine to do that. I'll have to ask Todd that when he comes on here in just a second. And then you put those labels on the wall, nice and big so everybody can read it. You can easily find stuff inside of a data center. It's really super easy. Now let's talk about the flip side of that. Let's talk about what kind of labels should we use? And what about the low humidity and the cold environments? What's the best practice? So I'm going to bring Todd on so he can answer those questions. Let me take this off the screen so we can actually see us. Todd!
Chuck.
For those of you who don't know, Todd is also a fellow content creator. He does every other week BS with Todd, and the BS doesn't stand for what you think. It stands for Brother Systems.
Well,
Yes.
we got to keep it PG.
Yeah, exactly. See, Todd and I, we never really physically met each other, but we both consider each other friends, and we have a lot of things in common. We're both bikers. We both love to ride motorcycles and stuff. We both are kind of bald in the head. We're both getting kind of long in the tooth, getting kind of old, getting kind of up there. You see all the faces he's making at me. So, Todd,
yes,
give us some good advice. Labeling in data centers. What's a good best practice?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that people forget, Chuck. And I did an episode on this data center labeling. I don't know, it was a month or two ago. But some of the things that you need to label in data centers are. I'll just run down a real quick list. So racks, cabinets, panels, ports, patch cables, conduits, raceways, pathways, data cables, grounding, bonding, fire stop, access control, transformer, generator, switchgear, UPS, PDU, remote power panels, rack power outlets, server switches, routers, active electronics, of course, all your passive as well, but mechanical safety, facility signage, fire suppression and alarm, piping, and then warning signs. So,
I lost count. How many was that?
It's a lot, Chuck. It's a lot. And I can certainly, Chuck, after this is done, I can send you, what I'm going off of right now. It's not all up here, Chuck. It really isn't. I like to, like you said, we're getting old. We forget things. So, my little crutch right now is I can certainly send it. And if anybody.
You got notes you're working off of? Cheater?
I know. But you know what, Chuck? You're not going to remember either. So I'm going to send you my notes just in case anybody asks about this stuff. So there's a lot that goes inside of a data center besides your simple infrastructure labeling that we typically talk about. And as you mentioned earlier, Chuck, there's a lot of different factors. One case in point, I was at a very large data center in Phoenix, Arizona before the pandemic hit. And this hot aisle was probably one of the hottest hot aisles I've ever been down. And so the first thing I did is I kind of migrated over there and took a look at the labeling. Now, they were not using Brother labeling, I can tell you that. But what I noticed is a lot of labels sitting on the floors of these cabinets. All right. So these labels had fallen off. The other thing that I noticed is that the heat in there had caused some bleed through. And that is, you might as well have no label whatsoever, because as you're looking at this label, you're basically seeing a flag label, but you're seeing both sides at once because it has bled through, right? And you can't identify that cable. So at the end of the day, what that means is a lot of extra labor, a lot of extra consumables, in relabeling that process. So I asked the data center manager out there about that particular problem, and he just rolled his eyes. And so inside of a data center, again, you've got things like fans blowing all the time. I mean, unbelievable. And so that's causing the label to move. All right. You've got hot and cold. So sometimes, things expand and things contract. They expand with heat, contract with cold. And cabling and the jackets around cabling are the same way. They expand and they contract. And so therefore, it's going to affect the label. So not only is there a litany of things that have to be labeled inside of a data center, and I'm sure glad you brought that grid screen up, Chuck. That's fantastic. That's one of the most forgotten about aspects, I guess, of labeling a data center. So anyway, there's a lot that goes into this data center labeling. And from my experience as a contractor, actually labeling, yes, I used to work for a living. Labeling was probably my least favorite. You want to get in there, you want to blow and go, and you just want to move on, and labeling can be tedious. So you want to use the type of devices, this one in particular, the PTE 550, we sell quite a bit of because it really is easy to use. So you want something that's easy to use. And then you want a label that's going to stick. You want to do a one and done. And the next time you go into that data center, if you are a contractor hired to work in that data center, you want to be paid for your work. You don't want to go back in there, and you don't want to have to replace things and basically, do work for free, more or less. So my suggestion is use a solution that's easy to use, and number one, that you don't have to go back and continue to replace because of that data center environment.
Right.
So, there's kind of my 2 cents on not only what goes inside of a data center beyond what we think about as far as your racks, your cabinets, your patch panels, and so forth and whatnot. But again, make sure that those labels are going to withstand the environment of a data center. And brother labeling, I got to tell you, the episode I did this morning, Chuck, and I'm sorry that you were teaching, you missed a good one. It was great. What I did is I took some labels, I put a label on the back of my truck window, I put a label on the tailpipe of my truck, and then it shows me driving through a car wash, and you got the brushes whipping all over. So all of brother labeling, except for our heat shrink, is laminated. And it will withstand heat up to 250 degrees and 80 below zero. So again, you've got that range where these labels are going to perform for you. So again, choose the right product for what you're doing out there, and you'll be fine. So there you go, Chuck. There's my 5-minute answer to your question.
Yeah. And that's one thing I like about, that's why I love your content. Cause I did, like I said, I watched your video during our lunch break today because we were actually teaching, it was actually a Pacific class. So it was done Pacific time. So we didn't start till like 11 o'clock my time. And that's why I kind of came, I literally watched as you started coming off of it, and you put one on the tailpipe and you put one on the thing. And I got to admit, you were kind of light on that pressure washer. You were kind of light on it. You should have drilled down a little harder on that pressure washer. I'll just say that.
Hey, that's all I could afford. I had $79, and I could have turned the water hose on it, but it was a little more pressure than the regular water hose. But you know what? It didn't matter. The label still stood up.
It did stay, and that's fine. And that's one of my biggest complaints when it comes to not the brother systems, but especially like a lot of people still like to use the old P touches and stuff like that. Those labels 6 months afterwards, they've fallen off and they're gone. And when it comes to labeling, people fall in one of two camps, right?
Right.
Either
so
they get it or they don't.
There's a big difference, and I'm glad you brought that up, Chuck, is that I'm sure everybody on the call today recognizes this, all right? We all use these. I used to instruct my guys whenever we're out of town to go down to your local big box office store and pick these things up for $39, but they use a paper tape. It's called an M tape. Now, back in my day,
right,
that was acceptable, and you label it and then you leave, all right? And they're not laminated. So the industrial solutions side of the fence has been around now for about 10 years, and it's completely focused on our business, if you will. So unfortunately, I still see people using these things, paper tapes, and it is P-Touch, but it's the industrial P-Touch version. This is kind of your home and hobby stuff.
Yeah, it's the commercial grade stuff. It's not the residential grade stuff.
Correct.
Yeah, that's why I was talking. I wasn't necessarily referring to the brand itself. Evidently, my dog wants to be a part of the show today. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely good stuff. And I'll tell you one thing I do like about the brother system stuff, and you pointed out in today's episode, the flagging. You can do the two different ways. That was so cool. That was so cool.
Yeah, the flagging. So real quick, here's a traditional flag, and I know it's tough to see, and this one's been in water now for 8 months, something like that. That's a traditional flag. The problem I have with a traditional flag, and here's an example right here, Chuck, is that once you get these things and you got a bunch of cables together,
you can't read them.
It's horrible. And you're going to end up opening up that cabinet to kind of do this and find the right flag. So I'm not a fan of flagging whatsoever. I never will be. However, one of the things that brother did just recently is we developed a couple of different flags. So here's your old flag right here. but look how nice and clean that little flag is there, right? And again, the flag goes both ways. I got to be careful about where and how I say that, but it does go both ways. And it's nice and neat, and it's legible. All right. So that's one of the things. It's one of our new products that we came out with. Sometimes flagging isn't necessary. You get inside of an LIU, a fiber LIU, and it's tough to label that. One of the things you may want to consider, and Chuck, I think this goes hand in hand with, how to use identifiers in a data center. Brother makes heat shrink, and I think personally the heat shrink is a much better option. So consider a strand of fiber, if you will, or a jumper cable. Typically what they do is they flag it, all right? One of the things that a lot of my customers are starting to do now is use our heat shrink, and the heat shrink is in a cassette system. You get 5 feet of heat shrink. You can pick the size of the heat shrink anywhere from 1/4 inch up to 1 inch as far as the width. But the beautiful thing about that is that it comes out on a flat tube. So you pinch it, you slide it over the fiber, and then you don't have that mess of all these flags, number one. But if you need to re-terminate, you can slide that back a little bit. You're not going to heat it up. Yeah, just leave it loose tube. All right, slide it back a little bit, do your re-termination, and you don't have to relabel it. So again, the heat shrink is an option. The flags are great. Sometimes you have to use them, but I like the heat shrink.
One of the things I noticed you haven't mentioned, or maybe I just didn't catch it. Maybe I was didn't give it my 100% attention, like my wife says I do sometimes. UV. Do your labels have any kind of UV protection? How do they stand up against that?
You know what, man? I'm telling you, you are spot on today. Okay. UV rating, all right. So all of the labels that we have that are laminated, and let me see if I can do this without script here, Chuck. So they're going to be water resistant, fade resistant, scratch resistant, scuff resistant, oil resistant, caustic resistant, gas resistant, and UV resistant. UV resistant, and I go back to this tape right here. All right. Anytime that you're using a paper type of tape, and I've even seen it on my competitor because I used to work for the competition, when they use like a permanent polyester tape, or a nylon tape even, is that label over the course of time will fade. Now, definitely paper labels, some of our old M tape, it's worthless inside the environments that we work in.
Right.
You have to use something that's UV resistant. And again, we're talking about years of being adhered to something, and there's not going to be any fading whatsoever caused by UV. And inside data centers, really, that's all it is. There's UV all around us. And so if you have a label that is not UV resistant, 100% guaranteed that over the course of time, it's going to have to be relabeled, and that comes at a cost. So all these little things that you're mentioning comes at a cost. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. You get what you pay for. Yeah. If you ever want to UV test something, I live in Central Florida. Send me some labels. I'll put it on a piece of sheet metal and put it out in the yard. Because I'm telling you, the sun here in Florida in the summertime, I got a hat, one of my company hats I have on a dashboard of my truck. It's literally bleached. It was like a dark royal blue. The front half of it's white now.
You're good. Craig Robinson, my glorious leader, lives in Bradenton.
Yep.
And so what he did is that when he first bought his house 4 or 5 years ago, he went out to his pool pump, and on the PVC pool pump, he put a couple labels on that pool pump, and he'll still send you a picture of that label today, that very same label 4 or 5 years later sitting on his pool pump. So it does make a big difference.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize the impact UV has on stuff, and they don't realize it's everywhere. That's why I brought that up, because a lot of people associate UV with being outside, but there's UV light everywhere.
Oh, I'm being hit with it right now, Chuck. I can feel it on the back of my head.
Yeah, no, I'm getting blinded by it. Oh, no.
Oh my goodness. That's a good point.
Too funny.
Very good
Too
point.
funny. So it's their choice, Todd. If you want to hang around for the rest of the questions, if you want to bolt, it's totally up to you. I'll let you decide.
You know what, Chuck, I got to tell you, this is I'm moving today. The movers are here. I've got
Understand 100%.
I'm surprised you haven't heard. I mean, the walls have been going off, and the gardeners out there blowing stuff. So, yeah, as much as I'd love to, and you know I love you, and I love this subject, I'm going to bow out very gracefully. But I do want to thank you very much for your time. Anything labeling is near and dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about labeling and this whole industry altogether. So, Chuck, thank you very much. In fact, my gardener's starting his blower right now. So with that being said, I'm out. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again. Don't worry.
All right.
Thanks again, Todd.
Thanks.
It's very cool. So that was one of my members of the Expert Council. So now let's talk about some of the questions that were submitted to us. Again, like I said, questions that are submitted to us in advance get preference. If you do have a question, though, make sure that you put it in the chat box. And I do monitor the chat box as we're talking, as I'm giving questions, so I can answer them as well. So the first question I got that was supposed to be scheduled for this show was from a technician. He direct messaged it to me via LinkedIn, and he'd asked, he says, Chuck, I like the technical videos I can find on YouTube. Is there a way to download the video so I can watch them offline when I'm on a site? Okay, there's only really one way that I know that you can download videos off of YouTube, and that's to use some software that can extract that information. But you got to be really careful because a lot of those software put bugs on your computers and they put viruses on your computer. So I would kind of really, really leer away from that. I really, really would. So the next question is, so we got the data center. So the next question actually came to me with another direct message on LinkedIn. And this is from Tom W. And Tom works in a place that manufactures cordage, patch cordage and stuff like that, pre-terminated stuff. And he's thinking about getting his RCDD. And he asked me, he says, Chuck, what are the opportunities? What opportunities does getting an RCDD present to me? I work in a cable house. Oh my God, it's going to open up a whole bunch of doors for you, right? Because that's one of the pre-qualifications. So if you want to start doing, for example, like estimating, start looking for positions that offer estimating. And once they see you're an RCDD, that gives you a leg up on most beginning estimators. I know RCDDs who do sales. I know RCDDs who do project management. I know RCDDs who do estimating, quality assurance, training. There's all kinds of things you can do. Once you get that RCDD certification, the industry looks at you as an industry expert. Now, that's a double-edged sword too, because now that you've got that RCD certification, everybody expects you to know the answer to everything, and you can't know the answer to everything. That's why I've got an expert counsel. That's why Todd was on here tonight, because again, I could address how the standards say to do the labeling, but he went way more with the label stuff. So you got to keep people. So the second half of Tom W's question was, he goes, I saw in your latest podcast where you were interviewing the RTPM, and I heard that you took you 2 times to pass your RCDD. What are some good study techniques? That depends on what kind of a learner you are. Now, for example, my sister, my middle sister, she could literally read something and have it memorized, done. I was never that kind. So that kind of person, you just got to read it. Most people are tactile learners, meaning you got to put your hands on something and you got to read it. You got to say it. So there's a lot of different ways. So I think the best way for most people is to go ahead and take one of the Bixby prep courses. I really honestly feel that way. And I didn't do it that way, but after I've done it, learned from my mistake. I really wish I had. Because of that, I failed the first time. Most of the people that I talk to who use the Bixby prep courses usually pass it on the first time, because a lot of times the instructor who's teaching that class, A, they are an RCDD, and B, some of them are very intimately familiar with the whole process, so they can help guide you and tell you, hey, make sure you note this, make sure you notate that. So I highly recommend those courses. I also suggest another method is, if you find somebody who's going to be taking the RCD exam about the same time as you, create a study group. And that's easy to do now with all the virtual software and stuff. Just get on and do a Zoom call and stuff like that. In fact, one of my mentees, he's actually studying for his PMP exam. And he the guy that I'm interviewing on next Saturday or next Monday's show is also a PMP. And so I'm going to actually do a Zoom call with my mentee and the guy that you'll see on next Monday's show. And that guy, Scott, will tell you that they had a study group, and that helped a lot, because what that does is when you have a study group, and they just literally went through one chapter at a time. When you have a study group, when you read a paragraph or something out of that book and somebody else reads it, their interpretation of that paragraph is going to be different. Not necessarily way different. It might be just slightly different. And then when the two of you talk, you actually come to a better understanding of that content. So study group, one of the Bixby prep classes, or you could do it the hard way like I did. I literally read it, wrote on a whole bunch of index cards, and memorized them, and just worked my way through that. The next question I have, and this one actually came via an email. It says, Chuck, we're installing armored fiber. Does the standards require armored fiber to be inside of innerduct? No, it does not. The standards doesn't require innerduct at all. Actually, as a matter of fact, innerduct is a best practice that our industry has accepted, and we see it done a lot. We just assume that it is, in fact, standards. It's not standards. Here's the thing. Innerduct, while it does provide some protection, it's not for protection. Innerduct is for two things. One, it's a conveyance system for future fiber. So if you got to put another fiber in between those two telecom rooms, it's easy to do because you already have a flexible conduit between those two. And the innerduct is colored, brightly colored, usually orange. And that's to warn the other trades that, look, hey, if you break this, we're going to charge you $1 million to fix this. So innerduct is not required by the standards, but it's always a good best practice to put it in. Armored fiber, it's in armor. It doesn't, you don't have to worry about it. You could literally step on armored fiber and not cause it any problems. But if you want to put it inside innerduct, yes, but just be known, it is not required by the standards. The next question, it says, let's see, Chuck, can I put a telecom room in a bathroom? Yes, somebody actually sent me that question. In my 40 years of communications, I've seen probably 2 telecom rooms in bathrooms. And one was in a men's bathroom. The other was in the ladies' bathroom. Actually, it wasn't in the bathroom. You had to literally walk through the bathroom to get to the door to the closet to get into the closet. He didn't specify in his question, so I have to assume he actually means in the bathroom. Here's the thing. A customer can put a telecom room in the bathroom, in a janitor closet, in a storage closet, if they so desire, because standards are voluntary. It's not in their best interest to put it in those rooms because there are certain things that are going to happen that could cause problems with your cabling. For example, cardboard. Cardboard creates a lot of dust. Todd's probably figuring that out right now. He's packing all of his stuff in cardboard. And then when he takes it to his new house, it's probably going to take him a little while to unpack everything. He's going to notice there's going to be a lot of dust. Let me know, Todd, how much dust you run into. Well, our stuff, and I say when I our stuff, I'm talking about fiber cable and copper cable, they don't like dust. Dust causes problems with continuity, right? So definitely want to make sure that you stay away from that. Now, the next question that I had is, Chuck, how do you anchor a rack into a concrete floor that has post-tensioning? That is such a great question. Such a great question. Now, to answer that, I got to maybe explain what is post-tensioning. We got to talk about construction first. So when you see a multi-story building, right? Multi-story buildings, first thing they do is they pour the concrete slab on the earth. Right? Okay, that's called slab on grade construction. And then they're going to build columns up from that. So typically what they're going to do is they're going to build a box out of plywood. Inside that box, they're going to do some rebar and some wire. They'll pour concrete in that, let that cure. Once it's cured, they're going to take some more plywood, create a subfloor, and pour concrete on that floor, and then work their way up. Post-tensioning means that there's a wire, usually a pretty thick wire. It's usually 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch thick, and they run it through the concrete when then they pour the concrete on. Once it's done, then they put bolts on the end of those wires, and then they tighten them, and it puts that concrete under tension, and it makes it stronger. It compresses the concrete. Here's the problem. If that thing breaks, if it gets cut, you're releasing a huge amount of energy. As a matter of fact, I told this guy this in my response. I did a project in Memphis, not Memphis. I did a project in Clinton, Mississippi for MCI WorldCom back when Bernie Ebbers was running that company. And it was a 4-story building. It was post-tension concrete. And one of the contractors was doing a core drill through the concrete. Now, at this particular time in the project, they were just putting the marble facade on the sides of the building. They hadn't put in the glass yet. They were just starting to put the marble facade on. So this contractor core drilled through one of the concrete floors, and unbeknown to him, there was a post-tension wire. Once he cut that wire, it released all that energy. And that wire and the bolt went through that 3-inch thick marble rock and shattered it like it was glass. Lots of problems. And that weakens the strength of the floor. So there was all kinds of safety concerns. So now that you know what that means, what about drilling a hole in the floor for mounting a rack? Now, most drop-in anchors, generally, you only have to drill down about 3/4 of an inch. You don't necessarily have to drill down that very far. So a lot of times you're not going to be near that. Post-tension wire, a lot of people don't know this. So on the ends, that wire is in the middle of the concrete, but it does kind of bow in the center because of gravity until the concrete gets in there and fill it. 2 things you might want to do. Number 1, hire somebody who can come out with an x-ray machine and x-ray the floor where you want to do this. Now, you could probably get by without doing it because, again, you're only going down 3/4 of an inch, but why take the chance? Get that floor x-ray so that way when you drill into that floor, you're not going to be getting into that post-tension wire or causing something to snap or cause problems with people, okay? Also, on post-tension concrete jobs, a lot of times when they got the concrete done, that floor done, the GC will take paint and literally paint lines on both sides, the floor side and the underside, to let you know where that post-tension wire is. The issue there, it's not always accurate. Sometimes it's off. And I think that's kind of what was happening with that other contractor. So don't necessarily go by that. So the safest way to actually do that is to make sure that you get the floor x-rayed. And then just do drop-in anchors, and then you anchor to the floor. And don't forget to bond that rack to a ground. Okay, so we are at 6:33. So we've done our 30 minutes for today's class or today's Q&A session. I appreciate each and everybody who's made it here today. And remember, we do this every Thursday, and it's going to go back and forth between Q&A sessions and the other ones I did, like ladder safety and stuff like that. So if you have any questions and you want to send them to us in advance, please, by all means, send them to us, and then we'll answer them in the next show. So until next time, everybody, be safe.